you do not want to have adiposity. Excess adiposity is like, people can do all these things to try and increase their lifespan with NMN and NR and NADs, but just reduce your body fat percentage and you'll probably go, oh, that'll go a lot further.
You are tuned into the Dr. Tina Show with Dr. Tina Moore. For more, visit drtyna.com. On this episode of the Dr. Tina Show, I sat down with Kyal Van Der Leest. Kyal is a young man who is wise beyond his years. And I tell you what, he gives me faith in humanity again. I'm excited about this younger generation after talking to him. He is a founder and formulator for the company LVLUP. They are a peptide-based company. These are oral supplements. And I wanted to get him on because I wanted to get you guys what you've been asking for, which is more about peptides, more about specific peptides and how we can use them and how can we access them readily. And you can do so through LVLUP because, again, these are oral, these are over the counter, and they're considered supplements. The beauty and the reason that I had to have this particular young man on was because I got a bottle of their GI Repair in the mail, and I looked at the formulation and I thought, this is brilliant. Like, what is in here all combined at the ratios that they're at is who did this? And I come to find out that this man is not only a nutritionist, but he is a naturopath. Now, Australian trained naturopaths are a bit different than licensed naturopathic doctors in the United States, but that does not mean that their knowledge base is any less. And this guy knows his stuff. Plus, he brings in this unique modern approach by combining in the peptides. So, beautiful conversation. I know you're going to love this one. It's chock full of clinical pearls and knowledge and just know-how on how to utilize these peptides in your life. If you head to LVLUP Health, that's LVLUP.com, LVLUP, and you use code Dr. Tina at checkout, you'll get a nice discount. I know you're going to love this conversation as much as I did interviewing him. So let's jump in. Kyal, thank you so much for coming on the Dr. Tina Show. You have introduced me to a line of products that I truly think are genius and remarkable, and I don't just let anyone on this show. I've used them personally because you've been kind enough to share them with me, and I wanted to introduce you to my audience because I think you're absolutely just a young genius in this space. And we're going to talk all things peptides. So thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me. And thank you for the compliments of both my brain and the products. I definitely have developed them to try and reduce the barrier to entry for peptides for people because they're like, thank you, GLP-1s, for bringing the public consciousness to peptides. We'll take it and we'll run with it. And yeah, hopefully the products can help people, your audience. They'll hopefully all like them. And keen to discuss them all. Yeah,
well, I've had a couple different folks on, but we haven't jumped into some of the other peptides. We've most notably talked about GLP-1s. And you are bringing peptides in oral forms, in supplement forms that are easily accessible to people at just really incredible formulations. I got a bottle of your GI Repair in my hands right before I had my upper bleph, which was my eyelid surgery I had in November. And I got the bottle and I looked at it, and you're a naturopath from Australia originally, right? Is that so? For the audience, there are fake NDs, there are real NDs, and there are, in that real ND category are the US NDs and the Australian NDs. And this is you guys are I've worked with many of you. You guys are smart people. You practice very similarly to how we do. You have a deep understanding, and it's always fun because you guys really, I think more than anybody, embrace true naturopathic medicine, to be honest with you. The fundamental principles. So this GI Repair formula, like, treat the gut first. That's like rule number one in at least the way I was taught in naturopathic school. And so the formulation is so great. I want to talk about that. You have a neuro formula, you have a longevity formula, and then you have a really great body composition formula, which I think will go right into that GLP-1 conversation. So let's jump in. Tell me your story. You've got a really compelling backstory.
Yep. So as you mentioned, studied naturopathy in Australia. It's different to America. We don't get the little ND title or the doctor title. They kind of strip that away from the Aussies, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, that was of all the courses I studied, because prior to that I was studying human nutrition. And prior to that, I was actually a graphic designer until my mum ended up being diagnosed with cancer. And then I thought, oh, crap, I better actually do something about this and learn how to sort of empower her and myself with learning about diet and learning how we can actually treat cancer or help mitigate the effects with proper clean diet. And so I went and studied nutrition for 4 to 5 years. I think, I can't remember how long it was specifically. And that left me really short of useful information to actually help people. It basically was a food accounting course, which was quite annoying and very outdated, talking about like food pyramids, except they call it the healthy eating plate in Australia. So after graduating nutrition, I went and got my first job, which was a blessing because it was in a hyperbaric oxygen facility, which amazing place to begin your career as a health coach or a practitioner, but also humbled the hell out of me. Having only that human nutrition degree at the time, I did not really know how to help people who come in with cancer or Lyme disease or some demyelination condition, or even like professional athletes would come in as well. And my nutrition degree wasn't really cutting it. So while working there, I just sponged as much information off the patients who were their biggest health advocates. They're the ones who had these conditions for ages. And I would ask them, hey, what are you doing? What are you taking? What's working for you? And the Lyme disease people were the ones who really interested me. And the cancer people were ones who really interested me too, because they were going to really extreme lengths. They'd try anything. They wouldn't just go to the chemist or to the health food store and a supplement. They'd seek every avenue to find ways to bring back their health, basically. And from there, from that clinic, I learned about peptides. A lot of the people who were coming in were using peptides because, universe works in funny ways. Opposite, across the road, was a compounding chemist in Victoria where I worked. So they would tell me all about BPC and all these thymosin peptides that they used. And I'd be like, wow, okay, I got to try these out. So I did. And at the time I had a bit of burnout, I had brain fog, and I had some gut issues. And yeah, BPC was the first one I tried in oral capsule, and it worked phenomenally, so much that when the opportunity came to actually make it myself, begin the business of LVLUP, I took it, and it has been an amazing 5 years since then.
BPC is like the gateway peptide.
Yeah, it does so much that I don't know many people who would take it and not get some level of benefit. They might take it for gut health and yeah, it'll work for that, but then they might notice a nootropic effect or a improvement in their sleep because, it helps with GABAergic tone and increases deep sleep. Or, they might have niggling injury that all of a sudden, that's disappeared since taking it. So it's, as you said, a perfect gateway peptide for people. To understand the power of peptides. And now the new wave of GLP-1s are gateway peptides as well, that, if someone can lose 100 pounds off GLP-1s, and that shows the power of these molecules and shows why everyone's calling them the future of medicine.
They really are. And the FDA here in the United States came after several of them in the injectable form that you could get through a compounding pharmacy back at the end of, was it 2023? And some of them have come back, but that's just been this constant flight. And the really cool thing that's come from that is that these companies are popping up with good quality oral forms. And I honestly have found that BPC 157 orally has done way more for me than an injectable form. And that's because I have had, truth be told, I have had gut issues since I was a little kid, like little kid, and it was constant. And a lot of it was stress and anxiety. We moved a lot. And so I was constantly having to go to a new school, and I had just that. They called it, I was hyperkinetic, not ADHD. Back then we were hyperkinetic. So the recipe for health in that case was to actually get more exercise, get outside. But now they drug these poor children. So my gut was really the driver of so many of my chronic issues. And this went on and on and on. I went through naturopathic medical school. I had access to all the things. I got into regenerative medicine. That is the bulk of my practice was, decades in regenerative medicine, doing mostly musculoskeletal work with regenerative medicine. But I was the girl that would try anything. Like I was helping patients heal fistulas and dealing with lichen sclerosis in the vaginal area. Like I was doing all kinds of stuff with stem cells and PRP. But the one thing that I always realized was these folks' results were only as good as their blood was. If I was going to be utilizing their blood to make PRP, the results and outcomes were only as good as their overall health was. And this was before peptides really came on the scene. And truly a huge driver for so much of these people's woes was their gut health, as was mine. And even with all the best of intentions and the best of exosomes, stem cells, all those things I had access to, I could not get my gut health under control. And then it really fell apart in 2021 because I pushed back pretty hard against the COVID narrative. And was on the receiving end of the last presidential administration's censorship industrial complex. Like they came down hard on me and it was personal. And my gut fell apart completely after a trip to Mexico where I got a nice little amoeba. And it was BPC 157 that pulled me back out of that. And I have had such remarkable gut health ever since. And it's a tool I can go to. And I have wished that somebody would combine it with some of the ingredients you finally combined it with. So thank you, because no kidding, that GI repair formula. Let's talk about some of those ingredients first off, because it's a remarkable combo you put together.
Yeah, well, I formulated it about 4 years ago for a housemate of mine who had IBD. She had Crohn's disease and was almost at the point where they were going to do a surgery and she'd be on a stroma bag. It was that bad. And tried all the infliximabs, tried all of the immunosuppressants, was losing her hair. And I'm like, oh my goodness, surely there's something that can work. Anyway, I developed that product, but she was a nurse and knew better and didn't want to take it. So from that, GI Repair was created, and since then it's helped countless people. I think we sold almost 100,000 units of it to date, which is amazing, and the feedback's been phenomenal. And I'm just so glad it exists because it's designed for pretty much any gut issue. There's something in it for every part of the gastrointestinal tract, whether you've got a stomach ulcer or a H. pylori. The zinc carnosine and the BPC will work on that part. It's Ben Greenfield described it when we spoke as a shotgun formula for your gut. Like there's just something for every part of it. Be it the large intestine, you've got the tributyrin, the bioavailable butyrate to directly fuel the enterocytes, the cells of your gut lining, which goes a very long way towards healing the gut. If they have energy is like the currency for your cells to do all the other things that it needs to do, including healing. So by combining the things like quercetin and a more bioavailable form called EMIQ that helps with histamine. Quercetin directly seals the gut lining. By combining all these things I learned about in naturopathy and while studying functional medicine while working at the hyperbaric place, combining those with these potentiators, these accelerants, which are peptides, they make the naturopathic things work so much better. The nutraceutical things work so much faster. Like you could take L-glutamine and aloe vera for months and get a fraction of the results as if you just took BPC for like a week with the same ingredients. So that's why I love peptides. I know you yourself as well. You use them. You use them to boost and accelerate the healing process and just get people better as fast as possible. And as far as I can tell, short of things like stem cell injections, there's few things that work as fast as these things as peptides.
And they're so much more affordable than going down the stem cell route. And the thing with the stem cells is really the best version of stem cells is your autologous, meaning your own. And again, if those are only as good as your overall health is. I always say your stem cells are only as good as your terrain. And most people's terrain is trash. And that's a really hard place to be, to turn a patient away and say, I can't do these regenerative injection therapies on you because if I take your hot mess of your blood and concentrate it down and shoot it into your hot mess of a joint, we're going to have problems. And so much of that hot mess of the joints is being driven by gut health, poor gut health. Like that's it. Everything starts in the gut. All illness and all health starts in the gut, in my opinion, as a naturopathic doctor. And you're so right. You could let me just break down the way I see it. You could take the zinc carnosine, which I have done at length. You could take the aloe. You could take, you could do the 4Rs that we hear about with we want to, basically it's like a shotgun approach, kill everything that's in there and repopulate it, right? You could take all the probiotics. You could take all the things. The minute you stop taking them, you go back to symptom picture. Like it sucks. And it's been this cycle, right? And so you get patients in who have different gut conditions and we treat them and we go through this whole rigmarole. We get the fungus to die back. We get the bacterial overgrowth to die back. We get we try to balance the gut microbiota. We do all the things. We try to get the gap junctions to close. We try to get the leaky gut to heal. And the second the gut protocol stops, or they go and eat something offensive that sort of spurs the bad bugs back on, because you never really are going to kill everything off, and we shouldn't try. That's just I regret that approach early in my career. With peptides, we're actually healing the inside. It's healing and regenerative, right? And anti-inflammatory. And what I do is I will, like my mom, for instance, I had her try your GI repair. She has Crohn's disease, and I gave her 10 capsules. I was like, just take 10 capsules. We can do a longer course, but the beautiful thing about peptides is they're a cycle, right? Like this doesn't necessarily have to be something that you're on forever. You take it as needed. So I took a 10-day cycle because if I do too much BPC, I do tend to start to get some water retention. And so I do a 10-day cycle and then I come off for however long. And then I was traveling. I keep a little baggie full in my travel pack, and I was traveling and I was eating a little too much and having too much fun, like eating at weird hours, where it's too late and everything, and woke up and my belly was distended and I had to go on stage. So ran to my GI repair, right? Like we use them as needed. And that's the cool thing about peptides is you're not always on the functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, like roller coaster that you can't, a lot of these docs will get their patients in and keep them forever. And the patient's like, when am I going to be healed? Well, that's a great question, right? So peptides get you there faster. Plus it can jumpstart a lot for people. We can really get people, you mentioned Lyme, and I know you have a back history of exposure to mold, and we can really jumpstart that process and get people further faster. And like you said, then the other treatments that we're applying actually start working better. It's so cool.
Absolutely. And I always tell people these are interventional things, not daily things. If you're going to take GI repair every day of the year, the receptors are going to burn out and not be that it's just not going to work as well. You need to take breaks from these things, no matter what peptide it is, be it a neuropeptide, a GLP-1, like these are bursts. Like at most you'd ever do is 2 months if you got severe, like intestinal inflammation, and then you'd take a break. I usually recommend like for every month on, you take at least a week off of the peptides just to make sure super cautiously that you don't end up with receptor downregulation.
Yep, I totally agree. And that cycle might differ for each person depending on the severity of how they're feeling. And again, this is not medical advice because this isn't a prevention, treatment, or cure for anything. This is a way to heal the body and harness homeostasis in the body. That's how I look at it. So I'm not ever applying something or talking about something as a way, like that's just the foundation of naturopathic medicine. Like we're not ever trying to prevent. Like patients would come in and say, have you dealt with this specific condition or this specific type of infection? And I'm like, that is irrelevant to me. I'm far more interested in how do I get the individual sitting in front of me vital again? How do I get their homeostasis working? How do I get their tissues healed so that they can heal with or deal with and heal whatever it is that's coming at them, And that's how I fundamentally see peptides working too.
Yeah, in naturopathy, healing is a consequence of improving health. It's not like directly going after a disease isn't kind of how we do it. We try and restore all of the systems of the body or the ones that need it the most. And usually the symptoms tend to resolve or the healing tends to happen. But you're doing it from the perspective of we're going to improve this person, not treat this illness. So that's why I love naturopathy. That's why I will never, ever give up on the tendencies of that and apply it as best as I can with these products. Like there's a term that they throw around in naturopathy called green allopathy, where you basically just become an alternative to a pharmaceutical by just throwing supplements at people and making sure they take them every day as symptom management. And that's never what I want to do with LVLUP. Like every one of the products that I have created with the brand are interventional and are things created to restore homeostasis. And then once you're there, it's up to you whether you think you need to take it or not. It's not like take it forever and jump on our subscription model.
Right.
That's not how I run the business. That's not how naturopathic principles work. So GI repair is a perfect example of that. Any of the other products like Todca, for example, that's one that we sell that I know you probably used yourself. It's a bile acid. It's fantastic if you've got liver issues, but if you keep pushing it, then you'll end up pushing too much bile and creating problems. NAC can be the same thing. Like every single ingredient has a happy medium, a golden point for how much to use and how long to use it for. And yeah, that's just my philosophy and what I recommend people do.
I love this so much. I'm like tingling. Whenever people speak the truth, I get the tingles. You're like my new best friend. It's just bizarre because I see so many people in the longevity space or in the biohacking space, and they always want to push certain pathways so hard, right? And it's the panacea and the end all be all for whatever. And it's like, no, dude, it doesn't work that way. Like, show me you don't fully understand this. That there's this, and I'm not saying that some of these guys aren't geniuses. They really are, but so much of what we see and hear about is like the tip of the iceberg. And then there's all of these other biochemical pathways. I'm not even that smart. Like, I really don't think I'm one of the smartest people that I know. I know people way smarter than me. And even I understand biochemically how, just fundamentally, how you can't ram a pathway forever without considering the cofactors and what's the other, like AMPK and mTOR, for instance, right? Like we can't just crank one side of that equation and expect good things to happen. And this is where I think we get in trouble with peptides, with supplements, with all the things, because we don't want to break down too much. We don't want to build up too much. There's a sweet spot, and it's completely different for each person. So this is where I think that some of these peptides that you've got in this formula are just really nice across the board. They're not, like you said, they're not a forever thing. If it's a forever thing, you've got other problems to deal with, right? And we have to say the obvious, which I always preach, is you got to do the foundational work. You got to do the strength training and the sun and the walking and the stress mitigation and eating a nutritionally dense diet and all the things, right? Like those peptides don't work if you're not addressing all of those things as well.
Yep, 100%. And as you mentioned, mold in your environment, I had infinite supply. I'm the owner of the brand. I had infinite supply of all the gut healing stuff. And naturopath, I had my access to as much of everything that I wanted. And none of it made a difference when I had high levels of mycotoxin in my circulation. My gut was still distending. I still had leaky gut. I still had brain fog. My testosterone crashed, histamine issues, liver enzymes elevated, homocysteine, all of the things that no matter how perfect my diet was, no matter how much I forced exercise because it was going to help, it didn't matter until I got out of that environment. And for people, it might be mold. For other people, it might be you're living too close to some industrial waste plant or something like that, or you might be in toxic relationship, one that's constantly keeping your cortisol elevated, too close to cell phone towers and huge EMF environments. There's plenty of that in the world at the moment. So those are all of the things that kind of supersede the gut health. Like we say, gut health is, I think naturopathically, interventionally, the first part that you can give something to help improve. But the free stuff is just all the other things, like your sleep cycles, your stress management, your relationships, your purpose, all those other things sort of supersede that too. Because if you're, as you know from 2021, your gut health was ruined because of the stress that you're under with scrutiny through COVID. So yeah, like a good adrenal support's not something we offer, but supplementally, I think that can indirectly help your gut health and your thyroid health and all of the other systems of the body too.
1,000%. When I teach hormones, I have a course called GLP-1 done right University, and I have a whole beefy hormone module in there. And I teach the foundations. And step number 1 is support the adrenal system, period. Because everything else won't work. If you don't, you'll bonk. But you can't just crank adrenals all day, right? Like I used to live off desiccated adrenal gland and all the adaptogenic herbs. And like that only gets you so far as well. So again, peptides. I wish I'd had peptides when I started all of this decades ago. It would have been much easier to get people further faster. That takes us to neuro. You've got a really incredible neuro formula that I also love. Let's talk about that one.
Sure. So neuro I developed for 2 reasons. One, because living in mold gave me horrible brain fog. And pretty much all the ingredients, the naturopathic ones at least, that I used while there were my life jackets to make sure my brain actually worked when I had to work and when I had to do podcasts while I still had ridiculously high levels of mycotoxin in my body. Kind of just like caffeinate yourself and push through, take a little methylene blue and you can make it work. Well,
I know that well.
yeah. But also the other reason is my opa, being Dutch, my granddad, he died of dementia. So it's pretty near and dear to my heart. That condition, seeing how horrible it was and how he just wasted away and lost himself. My father started to develop memory issues and repeating himself. And I'm like, oh, I need to do something about this as quickly as possible. I'm going to support his brain health. I'm not going to target dementia. But like when you look at all of the things that go into it, they call dementia type 3 diabetes. So like you're going to look at metabolic syndrome, you're going to support mitochondria and glucose disposal, healthy insulin levels. So cleaning up his diet and using things like berberine or dihydroberberine, supporting using anti-inflammatories that can actually get in your brain. Like PEA is an amazing anti-inflammatory that has an affinity for fatty tissues, i.e. your heart. So it helps people with heart inflammation, which may or may not be pretty prevalent from things that have come out in the past, and neuroinflammation, which is a big problem at the moment because when gut health is compromised like it is in so many people, you don't just have a gut barrier, you have a blood-brain barrier too, which is equally susceptible to zonulin, which is one of the primary drivers of hyperpermeability. that can cause permeability of the brain, and then all of the toxins that are getting through your permeable gut, like lipopolysaccharides, endotoxins, can then go into your brain and cause deep neuroinflammation. And that's what I dealt with. And I know that's what Dave Asprey dealt with, and what basically sparked his whole journey into biohacking and to bulletproof, bringing his brain back from, I think he's claimed that on a brain scan, it showed severe brain damage, and he had like an 8-year-old's brain from mold. Well, probably not as bad as Dave, but I still had that happening. I had mold colonized my sinuses. So between in the sinus cavity, pretty much trickling directly into my brain, I had mold toxin going in there until I managed to clear it out with sinus flushes and grapefruit seed extracts and all the other things that you can do, even a little bit of NAC in a sinus cleanse, which I recommend you do very cautiously because it burns. But
yes, I've nebulized that. It's painful.
Yes, exactly right. But yeah, neuro was my attempt to bring my brain back, restore any potential brain damage which probably occurred from being in 3 years of mold, and then to help my dad out. And again, using the naturopathics, lion's mane, BDNF booster, go to cola, ginkgo, bacopa, all blood flow enhancers, help get oxygen and nutrient delivery to the brain and waste removal. Use a bit of dihydroberberine to stabilize the blood sugar. And what I love doing, my biggest passion is finding ingredients that work better than what the mainstream are aware of. Like NAC has gained a lot of popularity for good reason. It's the precursor to glutathione, but there are other forms of NACs. There's also forms that are sort of downstream of NAC converting through to glutathione. You can use NACET, which is an ethyl ester form of NAC that has substantially better bioavailability, and it's also capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier to include increasing glutathione levels in the brain. It's often called NeuroNAC. The other one you can use is GGC, which is on the 3 steps of conversion through to glutathione, the middle step, NAC being the first, GGC is the second, and then it just converts directly through to glutathione. I like the precursors more than I do glutathione, unless it's like a really good quality liposomal one, which can have some effects. But I find the precursors better at increasing glutathione levels and taking it. So yeah, including NACET in the neuro formula was pretty important, and pterostilbene, 2 really good antioxidants, anti-inflammatories for your brain to help with that neuroinflammatory cascade that I believe is probably one of the few causative reasons why neurodegeneration occurs. And then sort of rectifying it with the peptides. Again, we come back to combine the naturopathics with the powerful, modern, scientific, cutting-edge peptides like dihexa, like P21 and Cmax. All of these peptides have been shown in animal studies, granted, hopefully the human studies come, to increase BDNF, increase NGF, nerve growth factor. These peptides work on so many different growth factor cascades that all ultimately result in improved brain function. And that's why I love this product. But one thing that I need to caveat is when you boost BDNF, some people, especially when they like lion's mane, people might say this, for example, they get a little bit brain foggy from it. Because when you boost BDNF, it actually is quite a metabolically taxing process to grow new neurons or to remyelinate or to undergo neuroplasticity. So you do end up with a little bit of inflammation from that. So by using the things like the NACET, the pterostilbenes, the ginkgos and bacopa, you're sort of quenching that inflammation that can occur when you really push BDNF. But my personal anecdotal experience having used it is every time I'm on it, it's like increased mental focus, increased verbal fluency, and also skill acquisition. That's a big thing that BDNF is beneficial for. When you're young, your BDNF levels are much higher than when you're older. I think before you're 7, it's ridiculously high. That's why kids just pick up everything straight away, and like learning a new language is so much easier when you're younger than 7 than it is when you're older. But since taking it, I've managed to, and this is like a chicken or an egg thing. Did I start to do these things because I knew when I took dihexa and P21 that I needed to probably get the benefits by learning a skill? But I've managed to pick up piano, not great, but I'm starting to learn that and it's finding it pretty easy. I've managed to learn how to serve a tennis ball, and I'm getting significantly better at basketball. Just like obviously if you practice things, you get better, but I'm finding comparative to when I did all those things before, it's much easier for me now because of that BDNF boost. And from my understanding, you do need to actively work on skill acquisition when you're boosting it too. So that's what I've been doing and liking.
I love that. That's great, especially as we age. I mean, we get BDNF from exercise and from just good, clean living, but it definitely starts to wane. And then people also, I was talking to you off air about the brain fog that I was having just as hitting middle age, and my zone of genius. I have always had some form of ADHD, and I love it. Like, it has allowed me to be a very successful human because I mean, if I didn't eat well and I didn't exercise, I'd be a complete hot mess. It would not be good. But I think when you're really honed in, it's a really miraculous tool. It's a superpower. However, as your estrogen wanes and you age and your BDNF is falling off, along with your human growth hormone levels, et cetera, it really starts to show itself. And so having a neuro formula is incredibly helpful. You did mention something that I think is worth noting, and that I always warn folks against when they are embarking on using any kind of neurologic stimulation, anything that like stimulates the brain. If you have really compromised health, or you do have a lot of exposure to like latent infections or mold exposure, sparking the brain can be a little bit of a challenge. And so this goes back to the gut, right? I always say, like, address the gut first and get that systemic inflammation down in the body so that we can address the brain without having, because sometimes people get a little jumpy when you start bringing, you'll get like a paradoxical reaction that you didn't expect when you sometimes bring in neuro formulas. So I love the idea of I love that the foundations of all of these are naturopathic in nature. That it makes so much sense. This is why I didn't know this about you until a few days ago. This is why, because every formula you've sent me a few things and I'm like, this is genius. But this explains it. So truly.
I don't know about you, but my kind of order of operations for healing people is work on adrenals.
Yep.
Then gut, then liver and detoxification and elimination, then hormones, and then you can sort of do all the extras wherever else. Like if it's kidneys are still not functioning, then you can go after them. If it's neuro, brain fog, all that sort of, if that's not already resolved from working on those prior ones, then you can bring in things like neuro. And then the additional things are, I want to like slow my rate of aging. I want to use NMN. I want to boost mitochondrial function too. That kind of plays in wherever you kind of want it to as an add-on on the side.
Because if we can get people feeling better, they start moving. My goal is always to get them interested in nutritious food, which sometimes it's hard to do. If you feel like complete garbage, you tend to eat complete garbage. Your instincts are off. Everything's dulled and your taste buds are dulled. You just feel like shit. So you eat like shit, right? And that's a tough cycle to get out of for some people. And so if we can this is where I really love the GLP-1s, because if we can give them something to get them feeling better, then they do better. If we can get people wanting to move, they start moving. When you start moving and you start focusing on that, you actually start drinking more water and you start eating better and you start going to sleep on time, because we're just fancy mammals with opposable thumbs. Like, we're supposed to have the same things that mammals have. My dogs are way better behaved when it's not pouring rain all day and we actually get outside and they get to run the fields, right? I have much better behaved dogs. Same with us, same with kids. Adults are no different. And so if we can get some of those features addressed, then they start making better choices. And as they start making better choices, I hate to use the analogy of an onion, but it starts to peel back the layers and we can start to see where we need to target. But every single individual is just that, an individual. And this is why people yell at me online and they're like, what's the dose? When they want to know the microdose of the GLP-1. And I'm like, I have no idea. The dose comes down to a lot of factors that I go into inside my course, but it really comes down with all of these things. What are our short-term goals? What is our long-term goals? What are we dealing with, right? Like, what's the playing field? And this is where peptides, I think, have a nice pleiotropic effect.
They're a fantastic circuit breaker or a spiral reverser. See, if you're stuck in a downward spiral, sometimes you just need to get pulled out. And if a GLP-1 or a BPC or whatever it is pulls you out, even if it's a pharmaceutical, I'm not opposed to them if they're going to long-term get you to your health goal. Like an SSRI, God, I definitely cannot say I'm a fan of them long-term, but short-term, they might be the exact thing you need to start doing the interventional, the lifestyle, the mental things to get yourself off of them in the future and get yourself in a better state of health. So
I completely agree. They're lifesavers in the right, done properly. I microdose those too. They're an anti-inflammatory on the brain at certain doses from what I understand. And so, and we're potentially sparking the HPA axis. So I just think there's a place for everything if people know what they're doing with them. It's when we start getting into peptides too, when we start getting into crazy high doses, not a fan. And long-term high dose, like of anything, I'm not a fan. So
Absolutely. That's a big reason I like the oral peptides is you can sort of dose up and you don't have to, you're not going to make the mistakes that you can with reconstitution, and you don't have to worry as much about, we still have incredibly high purity. We always test on our stuff. But if you're to inject a peptide that's contaminated with LPS or heavy metals, 100% of what you inject ends up in circulation, and then your body's got to deal with that. That's why it's important to really source your injectable peptides, especially from compounding chemists. Knock on wood that Kennedy makes them all available again, if he can do that. Or if you do an oral one, then it's not good to have LPS ingested nor heavy metals, but at least the barrier of your gut is going to selectively not let 100% of it into circulation. I believe heavy metals in a normal gut, only 0.1% of things like aluminium and mercury actually end up absorbed, which, over time can definitely accumulate and become a problem. But if you're taking a capsule, for example, you're not going to end up with 100 micrograms of aluminium or mercury in your body. If you did it orally versus injectable, you will. And there's so many people who detox heavy metals and yet will take peptides that are cheap and nasty and end up putting them back in, potentially, if they're getting them from really unreputable sources, of which, unfortunately, because of what you mentioned with the FDA, there's been plenty of them spawn up in the last sort of two years or so.
It's true. The whole industry's kind of gone rogue. And so when I find a good company that makes good orals, that I think it's a no-brainer, right? We know it's clean and they work. So plus I again, you're stacking them with such cool ingredients otherwise. That was really what intrigued me. My PR gal introduced me to your company, and she's like, "Are you interested in trying this?" And I pulled it up and I was like, "Fuck yes." That was literally what I said. I was like, that's what I texted her back. I'm like, "This looks amazing. Like, who is that? Where is this? What is this? I got to talk to this guy." So very excited.
I would have thought Nat Nidham might have introduced you, because she's a great personal friend and she's a huge advocate for peptides, and she's knows so much more about bioregulators than I do. I kind of stick to the peptides, and she's the bioregulator queen of the podcasting space. So yeah, that's I'm glad that they're coming to the public knowledge. And I think with people like Joe Rogan and the UFC and Gary Brecker and everyone's sort of talking about them now, it's fantastic. And even Eterna Health has started getting a lot of what am I going to say, mainstream recognition for using them with celebrities. The Kardashians, like them or hate them, they're all using them. And,
Yep.
GLP-1s are the gateway to them using all the other ones. So, great. This is so much better to be using these compounds than pharmaceuticals or surgeries or, medications that come with a plethora of side effects that lead to further medication necessity. And that's the Western model that I really hope, and I'm optimistic that's starting to come crumbling down. And that's kind of why I started LVLUP, is if something is going to come crumbling down and it needs to be replaced by something better. And LVLUP, I'm hoping, will be one of the businesses, one of the companies that provides that better option, or at least inspires another company or inspires the FDA or drug companies to go in that direction. And I think we're already seeing that with peptides starting to be patented and used by pharmaceuticals. They know that these things are good and are trying to make them proprietary property to keep their businesses alive. But when things are naturally occurring, like BPC, like the thymic peptides, like dihexa, most of the peptides, there's some synthetic ones, GLP-1s are patentable because they aren't naturally occurring. They're modified from nature, but the ones that are found naturally can't be patented. And that's why the studies are really lacking, because no one's going to spend $2 to $3 million studying something that every single other company can be like, thank you, we're just going to use your data and make money out of it and be $3 million better in budget to do so. So, but with people in positions of power now, hopefully government spending will be a lot more targeted to things that can actually help public health.
Well, and we have to take into consideration risk tolerance, right? This is something that comes up. I saw this so often during COVID, was people suddenly out of nowhere demanding your source, right? Which I'm all for, but I would never say something. I'm a physician with a license, and I take it very seriously that I have hundreds of thousands of people listening to me. And I would never just say something random because I heard it somewhere else. Like, I always check my source, but you can't always provide all your sources, because a lot of this is knowledge that you've acquired. Or, I mean, because I understand how something works, I don't need a source for everything to explain physiology, right? Or to explain pathophysiology, for example. And I think that when I talk to patients about peptides, or, I was in the regenerative medicine space for a long time. And so everything we were using was pretty novel. And I would explain to patients the pros and cons, but ultimately it came down to risk tolerance. And my argument on that is, a couple of things. Are we going to harm you by implementing this strategy or utilizing these supplements or whatnot? If the benefit far outweighs the risk, then, and I would share both, then it was up to them what they wanted to do. And ultimately, when we look at evidence-based medicine, everybody wants to hang on studies. But evidence-based medicine is a three-legged stool. And one leg of that stool is studies and data. And the other two legs, one of them being the patient's experience and needs and wants, and one of them being the clinician's experience and expertise, right? That's the triad of evidence-based medicine. And so sometimes we extrapolate from animal studies, yeah, but it's not that for the folks that don't, like, a lot of folks don't get how science works. It's not just that, okay, it worked in mice, so I think it's going to work in humans. No. If the study or the data that we have explains the mechanism of action in a mammalian species and the pathways, then I can better understand how that might work in a human, right? And so that's where I think things get hung up. GLP-1 is an example with the black box warning and the rat studies, right? That the black box warning was on rats. And the interesting part about that is rats and rodents have a receptor for GLP-1 on their thyroid that humans don't have the same receptor, which could potentially lead them down the path to this medullary thyroid cancer risk. But humans don't receive and respond the same to GLP-1s in that region. So it's like a different pathway, a totally different mechanism happening there. And yet there's not a black box warning on the worldwide intervention that was thrust upon everybody. So that's interesting. That's a side note. Anyway, this is how I go at it with patients, is I explain the risk tolerance. And sometimes patients will say, you know what, I don't want to do that. There's not enough information for me. Or they want to go do more research, which is great. Part of a legal PAR-Q. Do you guys have PAR-Qs? Like, were you trained in that process of a PAR-Q when dealing with clients or patients? It's risk tolerant. It's informed consent. And the PAR-Q is an acronym. It stands for, this is the procedure or what we want to do. This is the presented treatment plan. The A is for alternatives. The R is for risks involved. And then the Q is, do you have any questions? And I think every human should be presented with that when taking on a new journey into their health, right? Whatever it is they're going to inject or ingest, they probably should get a PAR-Q, especially if it's coming from a doctor. So we have data on a lot of these things, but also we have a lot of anecdotal evidence. We have a lot of people in the biohacking community using these things safely for a long, long time. So to me, that's how it adds up for me when I share with people.
100%. A lot of these ingredients too, I really respect and love the bodybuilder community because they're kind of guinea pig things for themselves. Yes. And like, it goes wrong quite a lot in them, but they're the ones who are willing to take that R in the PAR-Q, the risk for their reward. And we can learn a lot from biohackers who push it too much. Like, I'm guilty of that. In my 20s, I was like, I'm going to do everything. It doesn't matter. I'm young, I'm fit, I can do it. And then I end up with adrenal burnout. It's sort of like, oh, okay, now I've learned my lesson. I can then be wiser and not do that later on. But like all these peptides, even small molecules, like SARMs, like 5-10 years ago was so popular. Everyone was pushing and promoting things like RAD140 and MK677. And some of them might still have benefit for some people, but the risk of these things and what we've seen, not in animal studies, but just in repeated blood work, people's testosterone levels after RAD40 plummeting as if they'd just taken exogenous testosterone. Like, short-term benefit, long-term absolutely tanked T levels, and it might take you 6 months to restore it to half of what it used to be prior to taking it. Was it worth the risk? No. Should you have asked more questions? Definitely. But that's like regulations and government restrictions on compounds. I tend to be like, oh, that's really annoying. But at the same time, when there's very clear risk profiles to things, like they clearly have reason for it, that's good. But when peptides, naturally occurring things, like in Australia, they made BPC 157 prescription only, and their justification was because of its increased popularity, we are regulating it.
Yep.
Not because of risk.
Yep.
Popularity was their reason for scheduling it. And that is a ridiculous reason when something that's naturally made in your stomach acid that is healing everyone unanimously pretty much says that it has helped them in some way, shape or form. When that ingredient is banned, yet paracetamol is still something you can buy. Acetaminophen is still something you can buy from our supermarkets, and supplements that have horrible forms of zinc, iron that cause bleeding of the gut are prescribed by doctors still. Ferrous sulfate in ridiculously high doses. There's just so many things that are allowed and prescribed and perpetuated by the medical system, yet peptides are the ones that come under scrutiny. It's a bit ridiculous. And then schedules and things that have been pushed across the masses. There's a huge shift in consciousness happening. I'm so happy that it's happening, because I think that was our wake-up call for the last few years. And that's, peptides are now coming out. Biohacking has become popular. There's Netflix documentaries with extremists that get all the traction, but at least they might be a gateway to people. They might follow the extreme thing of, I want to live forever, but then find their happy medium point, sort of like what I did when I started. My extremity came from desperation. I tried everything biohacking on myself before using it on my mum to try and help her with her cancer. And what worked for me and didn't ruin my health or take from it, I'd have her do, like the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, the red light therapy, all the mitochondrial enhancing and supportive supplements, all the B vitamins, using every type of B vitamin to see which form resonated better with my body, which form worked. Folic acid, no. B6HCl, no. Those ones ruined me. But the correct bioidentical forms, I had to learn the hard way. I didn't have to, but I did learn the hard way about, naturopathic medicine, nutritional medicine does still have its risks, and it does still have potential problems for people if they, don't use it appropriately or use it too long. For example, like you can get vitamin A toxicity and all these other things. I definitely am very happy to see the future of medicine is looking a lot more naturopathic. So let's hope the momentum keeps going, and podcasts have been fantastic for that too. So keep doing what you're doing with your show, Tina.
Oh, well, and thank you. Unfortunately, my profession, not all of them, but the bulk of them in the naturopathic doctor world here in the States, completely drank the Kool-Aid during the last few years. It was super bizarre. And so it's been, I feel professionally homeless, and then I go out in the world on Instagram, and I try to speak in terms of like a balanced diet, and people, that this polarization is what flies there, right? In that realm. And so it's nice to talk to someone like you who gets it, which is just like, we have to be moderate in our approaches to things. And then for me, not every patient I have or client that I work with is like you, right? They're not young and robust. I mean, some people are really compromised. And so they're going to need a much more gentle approach. And I think this is the beauty of oral formulations, because we can gently ease them in. Sometimes with peptides, particularly the compounded prescription versions that are injectable, a little bit too much can be a lot too much. We see the biohacking community, a lot of these guys can handle crazy doses, but I personally, I always guinea pig myself up. I guinea pig my mom up. She's always game, she's always for it. And my mom says, you have saved our lives. Every single person in my family, including my husband's family at this point, I've pulled everybody out of a tailspin at some point. And it's because I'm willing to, experiment a little bit and see what we need to do and address the individual sitting in front of me. And some of that is really, I don't want to say clairvoyant, but it is. I just have a spidey sense about things, about what people are going to need or not respond to well. And energetically, I guess you will. The thing about oral, though, is we can dial that up or down a little bit. I do like injectable. I mean, my background's regenerative medicine. If I can inject something, I'm all for it. Number one, but it's harder to get. It might be more expensive. It might be less expensive, depends on the substance. But once it's in, and depending on its half-life. And with oral, we can kind of tiptoe our way in, right? Because especially if it's in a capsule, I like to microdose everything, especially if I have a sensitive patient in front of me. So anyway, I'm just sharing that because like different strokes for different folks.
Oral or injectable, it also depends on like the pharmacokinetics. Where do you want the peptide to go? If you have a distal injury in your wrist, for example, or a broken finger, injectable BPC every day of the week versus oral. The challenge with oral peptides is they do need to get into circulation, which really it depends which peptide you're using. Some of them, the chain length is just too long. Insulin's a perfect example. If they had an insulin pill, there would be no diabetics injecting themselves or on a pump. It's too large of an amino acid to be absorbed orally, so you have to inject it. Unlike ones like KPV, that's an antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory gut peptide. That's 3 amino acids long. That does not need to be injected. That can be taken orally, provided it's protected with something like a delayed release capsule. The things that'll break it down are proteolytic enzymes and acid. So the delayed release capsule will get it through the acid. And things like bicarbonate or sulfoprosate sodium will prevent the acid as well, but also allow it to get through digestion and get distally through the gut where it needs to be to have that effect. A lot of people take our BPC for injuries and they notice it doesn't work immediately. And that's likely because, well, you've got a lot of gut inflammation. It's working locally exactly where you've administered it through capsule. Let the gut inflammation subside or work on your gut health and then try it again. And then maybe that 500 micrograms of that peptide that was all being used by your gut actually will get more of it will get in circulation. And then you might break through that plateau that you need to actually start healing that injury in your elbow, be it golfer's or tennis elbow, or in your foot if you've got a bit of arthritis down there going on, or some issue distally. You need to get over that barrier first of fix the gut health. Like, as we said at the start, all health begins in the gut.
Yeah, that's that's why I love the GI repair formula. I mean, period. Like, if that was the only thing you had in your line, I'm sold, because I like that straight up. I'm like, well, this addresses a lot right here.
And I mean, we're not treating conditions here, but autoimmunity. Like, if 80% of the gut is hanging around the barrier of your gastrointestinal tract, if you can do anything you can do to reduce gut inflammation, reduces these endotoxins, these LPS and endotoxins from entering circulation, it calms down your immune system. The soldiers on the other side of your barrier can chill out finally. They don't have to be hypervigilant, hyper-responsive all the time to this low level of leaky gut or hyperpermeability. And once they have calmed down, then the whole immune system can calm down. It can fight off things, other pathogens, other things like dormant viruses, all those other things that people might be dealing with that just kind of get put on the shelf because they're so busy dealing with that gut inflammation.
Yep.
And the inflammatory cascade does need to be, that spiral needs to be broken somehow. And if you have gut inflammation, really bad hyperpermeability, that inflammatory cascade's not going to get broken. You can take all the immunosuppressants you want, like you can't do that indefinitely. And when they wear off, it's going to just be ready to go again, unless the gut health is fixed.
Yes, 1,000%. And to add to that, what I have found in my practice, which was predominantly for decades, predominantly musculoskeletal regenerative medicine, was that 95% of the time, people's distal joint pain was being driven by something centrally. It was not just a mechanical issue. It was very much an immunologic issue. And I'm not even saying autoimmune. Like, we did not run autoimmune markers to test for that because the treatment wasn't going to change any. There's this immuno-inflammatory, metabolic-driven joint pain that's happening. And so much of that is stemming from the gut. And I cannot tell you the number of patients who came in and said, man, my back or my SI, which was the region we were going to treat, or my hips or whatever, is really killing me today. And these patients I knew had IBS. And I'd say, well, how's your IBS? And they're like, actually, it's really flaring right now. I'm like, there you go. So much of people's joint pain is not necessarily stemming from their joint. And a lot of it can be improved upon, at least if we can get the gut to chill the F out and really just like you said, the leaky gut, the lipopolysaccharides, all the things, which so much of that is, it's so multifactorial. We can't explain it all here, but that's why at the end of the day, I treat the gut first. That's just what I do.
Yeah.
Okay. So that brings me, just because we were talking about GLP-1s and I know my audience is hot on that, you have a recomposition formula. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that's called Total Recomp, and that's my attempt to create a healthy weight loss, one that supports thyroid function, one that supports stable blood glucose levels, blood sugar, insulin levels. They're called glucose disposal agents, things like gymnema, which is a naturopathic herb. If you've ever used it, put it on your tongue. It completely numbs your taste to sweet things. It's quite an interesting experiment if you've ever got your hands on it, to see and taste and all the chemicals and other things that are being hidden behind the sugar. But chromium's another critical cofactor we put in it, alpha lipoic acid, vitamin B1, all focusing on metabolic health, blood sugar support. But then yet again, harnessing peptides using DNF10, which is a satiety peptide. It has GLP-1-like effects. It's not comparable. Nothing's comparable to injectable GLP-1s, but it has appetite suppressant effects. It actually acts on peptide YY as well, which is associated with reduced hunger. So it's not just GLP-1 that the DNF10 peptide works on. So there's two mechanisms for that one. And then there's a new, not peptide, but people think it is, called SLUPP332 that we included in that formula. And that is basically being called exercise in a pill. It's like an amazing weight loss one that works on the estrogen receptor alpha pathways too, to help increase fat loss. And it actually has a mitochondrial enhancing effect too. It increases ATP synthesis. So using that with things like fat burners like L-carnitine, like GBB, the precursor to L-carnitine, L-beta, which is a mitochondrial uncoupler, so that increases your metabolic, your body temperature. It's a thermogenic, because instead of pushing through the hydrogen ions in the electron transport chain to ATP, it uncouples them and sort of creates inefficiency in it, but that inefficiency is released as heat. So that actually is part of what's called thermogenesis and part of fat burning. Dihydroberberine is another one we use for blood sugar support. So this is like my attempt, because having lived in mold, I gained weight. It was just an unfortunate inevitability. No matter how much I lifted, no matter how much I restricted carbs or tried different diets, it just happened because it completely breaks, it causes leptin resistance, essentially. Your hormones go all out of whack. Estrogen goes through the roof as a man, which is not good. Testosterone plummets, cortisol's always high, because you are constantly being poisoned by these highly toxic mold toxins called mycotoxins. And the thyroid goes to crap, and iron levels can often plummet as well. So mold was one of these things that was a great teacher. It was horrible to live through, but with every system that it ruins, it created an opportunity for me to learn about them all. And, you know, fat loss was one of the ones that, you know, vanity, but also overall health. You do not want to have adiposity. Excess adiposity is like, people can do all these things to try and increase their lifespan with NMN and NR and NADs, but just reduce your body fat percentage and you'll probably that'll go a lot further than taking those things, in my opinion.
1,000%. People don't want to hear that. They don't understand it. But I come from that old school of, like, you know, the thin old Scandinavian dudes that live forever. You know, there's something to adiposity and keeping it low. And even that, when people talk about caloric restriction, I'm not a big fan of the calories in, calories out model, but I am a fan of, you know, organized, I call it organized caloric restriction for longevity. I mean, there's something to that. And I was taught that by my mentor, like, stay as lean as you can. It will improve your lifespan and your longevity. So I think that's brilliant. And people don't appreciate that about mold. It basically just makes you sort of puff up and sort of blow up, and all your systems go awry. But as you accumulate adiposity, you also have more storage for your toxins. And that's one of the reasons why you gain weight, is because your body's trying to deal with that toxic burden. And so it's creating more fat cells to hold it. So now you're walking around with a fat suit of inflammation and toxins. And then your body doesn't want to let go of those if your liver's compromised. You mentioned early on that, like, that's one of the tiers, you know, the early tiers is to address liver health, because if your bucket's full, your toxic burden bucket's full, your fat cells are going to start filling up with toxins. And now I see this with hairstylists. I see this with people who work in toxic fields. Like that's a tough one to get over. So keeping that adiposity low. Yeah.
You took the words out of my mouth. Often people go straight to sauna and then they do like a niacin flush, or they go through this extreme weight loss and then they end up very sick, end up with thyroid issues. You can see really dark circles under their eyes and their liver health goes to shit. And that's, I was actually going to ask you, do you think adiposity is just toxin storage? But you said it before I asked, because it was put to me in naturopathic school that adiposity is a result of toxin accumulation, which, that's the world we live in nowadays. It's a very annoying reality that when we do all the things right, that we can live in a house with an off-gassing couch, or we can live under a flight path, or drink the water from the public pipes and end up with issues. It's a very frustrating thing. And again, I'm putting a lot of hope in Robert Kennedy to try and remedy some of this sort of stuff. But, there's a lot of things and it's a very expensive thing to do, but whole house water filtration goes a long way, especially showering. The amount you will absorb through your skin's a bit ridiculous. Eating organic food as much as possible. The dirty dozens, stay away from them, because glyphosate's something. My partner, she was a really good teacher for me because she's a lot more sensitive to things than I am. I'll push myself and it's only once I push things to 11 that I break, versus her. She has about a threshold of a 3 out of 10 before she starts to notice things. So when we were living in mold, before I really knew it was a problem, we're like, hey, it's parasites. I'm just going to do a parasite cleanse. And then I ended up making her bedridden for 2 months from chronic fatigue and burnout. I'm like, oh crap, sorry.
Yeah, that's the parasite. I agree with you on the parasite cleanse. Again, we have to go gently with things. She might have, like I've got the homozygous MTHFR mutation, so I do not detox anything. And I'm very quick I'll walk in a hotel room and we have to do the sniff test. I sniff and then I'll turn around and I'm like, nope. And we roll right back out. And my husband's always like, okay. Or we'll sit down in a restaurant. I'm like, nope, we got to move. And he rolls his eyes, but he knows I'm not wrong, because there have been times when we got trapped in mold whilst traveling, and he ended up day 3, he presents differently than I do. And by day 3, he was having a lot of symptoms. And I was like, dude, that's mold. This is what I'm talking about. Like, I'm already off my rocker with a sinus infection and like losing it. And he's over here having his symptoms. And I'm like, that's because we've been in mold for 4 days in this room. So
it's funny you say the sniff test. When we were looking at homes in New Zealand, we went into one and my partner literally looked like a Saint Bernard or a beagle going through the carpet.
Yeah. And the real estate agents are like,
she's like, sorry, this one's had mold. And then later on, we found out it was flood damaged in the past.
Yep.
Like, you knew. Yeah.
I actually, I was about to buy a house. I had money down on it. They were about to accept my offer. And I brought in a mold sleuth tester to come in, an outside guy, and he did a thorough test and found all kinds of nasty stuff, which unfortunately I said no, we didn't go through with the offer, but unfortunately now that house has to report that in there as they're trying to sell it. And yeah, it's, people don't realize. And again, though, it's how, not to scare everyone, because my husband's incredibly resilient to mold, right? He doesn't get too sick from it at all, whereas I get really compromised really fast. It comes down to vitality. And what are we doing to stoke our vitality, which is the lifestyle factors, all the things, utilizing nutraceuticals and peptides as needed. And I'm just really not a huge fan of giving up easily, And so I'm here for all the tools, and I love to share them out with people, because I think that this field particularly is, like you said, the future of medicine. If people don't get hip on this, and my goal in life, I realized I can't, I would like to obliterate the allopathic medical system as it stands. I'm not a fan. I've never been a fan. I was a very sick little kid. The reason I became a naturopathic doctor was so that I could make a change. And I realized after 10 years in practice, I wasn't making any changes. I was just getting incredibly burned out, and that most people don't want to actually make all the lifestyle changes. They weren't nearly as excited about it as I was. And so I left practice. But that said, I've realized recently that my mission on this planet, through this platform, through my podcast and my social media following and amassing a following, really is to educate people, to empower them so that they can demand better out of their doctors. I can't get the doctors to do better, but I can get people educated and informed and empowered so that they basically can go in and say, hey, this is the future, catch up. Like that's my goal. So if I can make a dent in medicine that way, by getting people to basically just stop accepting mediocre medicine as it stands, That's where I'm at.
Could not agree more. My mum ended up dying of cancer, and on her deathbed, I swore to make a difference and change the Western system that failed her. And ultimately, it was the system that killed her, not the cancer. So that's what Level Up has spawned from her passing, unfortunately. It was funny, the timing of it. It basically began like a month after she passed, the business began. And I think bigger than, just if there's bigger forces that are at play in the universe, I feel like the business came to me at that time to sort of pick up the fight that I'd lost with her and sort of start dealing with the issue way, way, way before it gets to that point where you've got that big diagnosis that, keeps you constantly in a fight or flight response and makes doing all of the things right so much harder when you have been told that, oh, you're probably going to die, or, you've got XYZ years to live. So yeah, getting people to a state of health where it's not likely that will progress, or, getting those toxins out of your body. Like when I was looking at what causes it, because I was pretty shocked that my healthy former triathlete, former gym instructor mother ended up with cancer, but she grew up in agricultural area. She rode horses and got sprayed on by planes glyphosate all the time. And, her levels would have been through the roof. We never tested them because it was like, well, what's the point? We'll just, get rid of it now. But heavy metals, aluminium deodorants, the toxic soup that would have accumulated in her body whilst also being incredibly stressed her whole life. It's like, well, little wonder. So, naturopathic medicine, same as you, was a necessity for me to learn it because it's like one of the only chiropractics too. I'm a
chiropractor too.
Naturopathic medicine philosophies are the future of, even if the tools aren't there yet, which I think they're getting there, if not already are there, the philosophy just needs to be applied to Western medicine. If they took their tools with our philosophies, then, they could actually do good things. And there are functional medicine docs using pharmaceuticals like cholestyramine or ivermectins or low-dose insulin potentiated chemotherapies even have their place. Like use all of the tools if they work and they're not harming people. We don't need to be compartmentalized in, I'm a naturopath, I'm going to use herbs, or I'm a doctor, I'm going to use pharmaceuticals, or a nutritionist, I'm going to use food. Use everything that works, provided it's not harming people and you're seeing improvements in their health. And that's the tenets and the idea behind Level Up, is combining nutrition, naturopathy, and advanced science and medicine, basically, which, I think peptides I'm going to call medicines based on how well they work. They're comparable in their effects and the differences they can make, except they probably don't harm people or have the side effects. So that's my mission behind it, my why behind the business. And I hope it resonates with people. And it's good to see there's people out there doing their work and have their mission aligned with mine, like yourself. So
I love it.
Connect.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry about losing your mom. I'm going to cry. It's my mom's birthday today. And I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, it's my mom's birthday. And I called my daughter who was asleep, and she starts complaining that I woke her up. And I said, we got to call grandma. It's her birthday. And all I was thinking was, I was just so grateful that my mom was still on this planet right now, that touches my heart, that's her mission drive. Because I lost my mentor to cancer, and that is like, and his anniversary of his passing just happened. And I think about it every year, like, he would have fought like hell through COVID, just like I did. And he would, like, this is legacy, So it's nice to meet someone else whose business is based on legacy, because it's not just about me. It's like, this is bigger. And watching humans just get mishandled by a system that's broken is what drives me every day. So awesome. I love your products. You're my new best friend. We have to stay in touch. I think what you're doing is phenomenal, and I'm really glad you're on this planet doing it, because I'm excited to see when young people are doing really groundbreaking things. It gives me hope, because we need that right now so badly. And I'm really excited to be alive right now with what's happening politically. Regardless of what side you stand on, a lot of systems are getting burned to the ground, and I am here for it. So
bring it on. Yep.
Yeah.
Only through breaking down the old systems can a new, better one be rebuilt. So someone told me Trump isn't good, but he's a wrecking ball, and that's what's needed at the moment. So
bring it in. light it on fire. That's what I'm here for. It's an exciting time to be alive. So wonderful. I'm going to make sure that everybody gets access. You guys have been generous with a discount for my followers, and we'll make sure that link is in the show notes and that they can find your products and get access to them. I noticed that some are sold out on the website. Do those come back into stock?
We're restocking everything quickly. Annoyingly, everything sells out really fast, which is a good problem to have. But yeah, I think the histamine product with DAO in it and all of the mast cell stabilizers that I use during mold, I think that's the only one that's out of stock at the moment, but everything else is in. And yeah.
Okay.
Going to try my best to keep it that way.
Okay. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kyal, for being on the Dr. Tina show. And I'll make sure everybody can find you and find your lovely products, and keep doing what you're doing. And let's stay in touch.
Thanks, Tina. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Tina Show. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson and mixed by Mike Fry. Theme song is by John the Guild. You can watch the full video version of this podcast inside the Spotify app or on YouTube. As always, you can email the podcast at podcast@drtyna.com. That's DRTYNA. And if you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also find all of my offerings on my website at drtyna.com. For more shows by my team, go to wellnessloud.com. See you next time, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practices of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is intended not to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.